on December. Welcome on December 1st. What a gift it is to be with you. I just am sort of not looking forward to our last session, which is December 15th, because I've enjoyed so much your attentiveness as we work together. Let me just turn that off so we don't get interrupted. And so we are looking at reading comprehension, but everything we're going to talk about could be employed if I was a kindergarten or first grade teacher or even a preschool teacher, and I was reading books to students. What would I do that would make a difference if it was listening comprehension? And we're doing 2 sessions on comprehension. And the first, we're going to do the general background knowledge on the research on comprehension, and we're going to focus on narrative. And then next time, we're going to have a session on informational or informative text. But I just looked at this date and I said, my goodness, it's December already. My gosh. We're going to have participation as we always do, but I wanted to list out what you're going to be doing. Number 1, I'd like you to have a piece of paper. You need a number of pieces of paper for this session, and write down. Sometimes we've written down best practices, but this is really takeaways. What can you take away from this that would be employed in your class? It appears that many of you have been really working on opportunities to respond. Terrific. We had 3 sessions on vocabulary, and I've gotten feedback that you're really working on vocabulary. So you've done exactly what was the hope of these sessions, that you'd find something that was useful that you could take with you. Of course, as we also go through this session, there's going to be many things that you'll say, ooh, I already knew that. Ooh, I got that. And that will reinforce what you already are doing, which is equally important as having new things added to your repertoire. So you're going to keep a piece of paper and write down takeaways. And at the end, you're going to add those takeaways to the chat box. And sometimes I'm going to ask you to say short choral answers, just as you would do in your classroom, but you'll be muted. But do talk out loud, because you'll be more present, you will learn more if you have overt responses. Sometimes we're going to have written responses, and so that's why you need scratch paper available. And sometimes, because I have all of your names here, I might call on individual people to answer a question, and then they will open up and be unmuted. And finally, we will be reading together. So sometimes I'll say, let's read this together, and we will use choral reading, which is, of course, one of the best ways to involve all students in reading in the classroom. And I'm going to model some lessons, and you're going to be my students, so you get to participate there. So we'll have lots of active participation. We are going to start with comprehension. And I want you to think for a moment and pop into the chat box what would be, in 1 or 2 words, your definition of reading comprehension. So please think about it and put it into the chat box. And Loretta, you're going to read back what we gain there. And go.
Understanding what you are reading, understanding and retaining what you read.
And retaining.
Accuracy and fluency. Let's see, total understanding. Understanding text.
So basically,
understanding and remembering.
There's some congruence in these answers that is all about understanding. And so you thought about it. I went down to my library, which I have hundreds of books on comprehension. And from that, found 4 definitions, which would totally reinforce what you have. The act of understanding what you read. All right. And extracting meaning from what you read. So we understand it and we extract meaning from it. And we also interpret what we have read, particularly as we are making inferences. And we make sense of what we've read. So we all have basically the same idea because we use this skill constantly. Every time you read something, you are asking yourself, do I understand it? How does it relate to what I already know? What is my interpretation of this? What can I infer from this? So that is totally consistent to your understanding. And so this is a title that I adopted a number of years after reading and reading and reading about comprehension. And read it with me. Comprehension is an outcome, not a strategy. What do I mean by that? Well, I had so many people when I was at conferences or doing in-person trainings, which has been 2 years in my past, would come up and say, Anita, just tell me one strategy that is going to heal comprehension problems. Do you have a comprehension strategy that we should use? What is the one comprehension strategy that we could use? And I had to remind them that comprehension is much more complex than one strategy, that it entails so much. And this is the most important message I could give you, because if I have a student that is, let's say, a 5th grader, and they take a state test or they take a in-classroom test, in which they are to demonstrate comprehension. There are many reasons that they might do poorly in comprehension. And so we need to remind ourselves that these are the major 4 elements that feed into comprehension. Number 1, that in order to comprehend, the students need to read the words accurately and fluently. One of my ongoing mottos is, there is no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the fact you can't read the words. There is no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the fact you can't read the words. In fact, when we look at students who are in intervention in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, according to the research collected by Louisa Moats, about 80% of those students have poor decoding skills and low fluency that's interfering with their comprehension. Now, this is so critical because if we test a 5th grader, they do poor in comprehension, say, oh, we need to teach them a comprehension strategy, we better check out, can they actually read the words? Number 2, why did we spend 3 sessions on vocabulary? Because the second major feature in comprehension is you must understand the meaning of the words. If you don't understand the meaning of the words, it will directly interfere with your comprehension. And so when students can read accurately and fluently, the next thing we have to really be aware of is, do they understand the meaning of the words? And we have good data to show that you have to have pretty high percentage of the words that you understand. These studies I've looked at, depending on, is it narrative or informational text, say something around 98% of the words you have to understand the meanings of in order to get full comprehension. So the students have to read accurately and fluently, which we work on very solidly in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and continue in 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Meanings of words we are teaching at all grade levels. Next variable is, do you have adequate background knowledge to connect the passage to what you already know? That if you have no background knowledge, again, it is going to reduce your comprehension. And so that is very related to individual passages we might read that students might not have the adequate background knowledge. And then number 4, and this is where a comprehension strategy might come to bear, in that I have to focus all of my attention on what I am reading. I have to have my cognition on what is in print. I can't be watching television at the same time. I can't be talking to my mother at that time. I need to be totally have my cognition in the print. And so we look at what kind of strategies could we get the students' attention there. But you see, this is multifaceted, that any of these could reduce for you as an adult, for the students that you teach, their comprehension. So one of the things that I've done across our country is have school districts and schools look at what are they doing to optimize that the students can read the words accurately and fluently, that they have adequate vocabulary, adequate background knowledge, and can focus on the critical content. Now, throughout this time, I'm going to remind you of the importance of retrieval practice for your students, because I could just shoot through this, but unless I give you time to rehearse those 4, it will not go to permanent memory. And so putting your fingers up, I want you to touch them and say the 4 things that underlie our comprehension as we read. Feedback. So you can read the words accurately and fluently, you have vocabulary, background knowledge, and critical content. So now, much of comprehension is broadly done every day in our classrooms. And then we have specific things we can do in regards to a passage the students are going to listen to or hear. So here are 4 little checklists that I really like you to sit down with your faculty at your school or your grade levels and really analyze how strong are you on these 4, leading to the most important outcome of elementary school, and that is comprehension in the area of reading. So let's just look at these. And I want you to think, what do you think your school is doing on these? Number 1 was, you can read the words accurately and fluently. Okay, and here's what I'd look for if I had the gift of coming to your school. Do you teach foundation skills extraordinarily well to mastery to all students? Print skills, phonemic awareness, letter sound associations, decoding, increasing sight words and fluency. And do you teach in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade advanced decoding so that they could read multisyllabic words?
I'll be right back.
And do you provide interventions for students who've not yet mastered the decoding skills that are systematic and effective? Number 4, do you, for certain passages, stop and read through the passages and pick out difficult to read words, not based on vocabulary, but actual pronunciation, and pre-teach them before the passage? Okay, so here's what I want you to do. You got your scratch paper. This is preparing for discussion at your school site. and you're going to do a little personal assessment. And you're going to write down if you think for this first one, reads the words accurately and fluently, if your school does an excellent job on all of these, or a fairly good job, but maybe not on all of them, or you're starting to work on it. So in terms of being able to read the words accurately and fluently, put on your paper how you would evaluate it: excellent, good, or emerging. And if there's one of these that you think that your school needs to work on, make a note of that number so you're ready for a discussion. 80% of the students who have challenges with comprehension in the later grades is partly because they cannot read the words accurately and fluently. All right, number 2. Boy, we spent a lot of time on vocabulary. And so thinking about your school, these are the things that we embedded in that training that make a difference. That we use very high quality language in our classrooms so that the students are just bombarded with higher vocabulary. And we use academic language in our classrooms. And we read both narrative and informative read-alouds in the primary grades, with at least 50% of them being informative, which gives them more vocabulary. And that we promote outside of school wide independent reading. And we teach students to figure out unknown words such as inside, outside, using the morphographic elements in words, all of what we talked about. And before we have a passage that they're going to read or listen to, we ask ourselves, is there unknown vocabulary that should be pre-taught? So I want you to do the same thing for this checklist. I want you to say, for vocabulary, if you think your school is consistently doing all of these elements, excellent. If it is good, but there's some things they could work on, or it's emerging where the school is putting in now increased effort on it. So take a moment and write down your second assessment. Number 3, what is it? Background knowledge. And so what leads to more background knowledge? Number 1 is in the primary grades, the research shows that the more we read informative text to the students, the more background knowledge they gain. So I just was working with a 3rd grade class where the teacher was reading an informational text about water bodies, and the students learned the difference of large bodies of water between oceans and seas and lakes. So every time we constantly read to students, particularly informational text, they have the possibility of increasing their knowledge networks. And that network was on what are different bodies of water. And we better be teaching science and social studies and health so that the students get general and domain-specific background knowledge. And again, wide reading creates more background knowledge. And again, just as with vocabulary, if we're going to read a passage, we might have to stop and say, ooh, what background knowledge is necessary for this passage that my students are missing? So again, this is very intentional building of background knowledge. So a moment of self-assessment. And Donna, when you have a chance, would you mute yourself? Okay. So the last one is, what are we doing that helps kids hone in and focus on the most critical content? And that's what both today and on the 15th, we're going to put a lot of attention on. And we want them to focus on critical content. And we're going to use an overarching strategy of read, stop, respond. Now, if I am a classroom teacher, we would read a segment. We might read it more than once. We might read it silently and then read it orally, and then we stop and we respond. We respond by answering questions. We respond by using a comprehension strategy. We respond by adding information to a graphic organizer, but we constantly read, stop, respond. But this is exactly what a competent adult reader does, particularly in informational text. You read a segment. If it's less familiar to you, you might even read it again. And if you really wanted to retain the information, you would stop and somehow respond. Maybe you take notes. Maybe you rehearse the information. But read, stop, respond. It is intentional that you are trying to comprehend, and so you stop to personally respond. And we could stop and respond by asking children questions or having them generate questions to research validated methods. And we could also teach them strategies. Now, we're going to look at narrative today, and you are all very familiar with narrative strategies. And they directly relate to the text structure of a narrative. So get some paper out for the next exercise, and right at the top of it, story grammar. Now, I know that most of you are very familiar with story grammar, the elements that we consistently find in a story that could be used when I ask you questions. It could be used for students to generate their own questions. It could be infused into strategies that improve comprehension. And so we're going to take a moment and write them down. Now, I'll just tell you, now we have like an art teacher, a PE teacher, but you could still use your own knowledge about what would be some elements of a story. Now, let me give you like a starter set. Like a story has a title. A story has a setting that tells when and where it occurred, and might even add the significance of the setting. And okay, that's all you're going to get though. All right, so you've written down story grammar, and I am going to give you 2 minutes to write as many as you can by yourself, not with anybody else, and then we will check them. I'm going to do the same, and we'll compare them to my list. So getting ready and begin. Okay. All right. Now, so I wrote down many here, and I want you just to check yours off. And then we will have you put in the chat box any additional ones that you had that I didn't. Now, I get to practice this often if I do narrative, so I might have a few more. So I had title and setting, when and where something happened, and perhaps the significance of it. And then many times we look at the structure of a narrative, and many of you would be teaching that there's a beginning and a middle and an end. But some of you might have something like rising action to a climax and falling action if you're an upper grade teacher. And I'm going to bet, so you might have had something about the structure of the story. And then other elements. I'm certain that you have characters. Main character. I had other characters that are major or minor. I wrote down protagonist and antagonist that we might have in the upper grades. And there is a plot. And the plot starts with a problem. Sometimes the character has a goal. Sometimes there's a conflict. And in many story grammars, you see that the character has then a plan where they have attempts to resolve their problem and actions. And then there is some resolution to the problem, a solution, and even sometimes a theme or message that the author wants to give. Okay, that's the ones I got down. If you have something I missed, pop it into the chat box and wow us with that additional information.
Point of view.
Oops, point of view. I missed that one. What else?
Exposition.
Exposition, and that goes particularly with structure. And along with rising action, climax, and falling action. Excellent point of view. I can't believe, Archie, you missed that one. What else?
Cause and effect.
Cause and effect could be embedded in it.
Allusions, not illusions, but allusions and references.
Excellent. We have some very advanced people here on story grammar.
Vocabulary.
Okay, usually not considered a part of story grammar, but certainly a part of stories.
Figurative language.
And the same thing, figurative language occurs in stories, but it's not necessarily, grammar means the structure of the story. So, but I didn't have that one, so now I do.
Genre, foreshadowing.
And foreshadowing. And the type of genre could be a fable. It could be an adventure story, yes.
References.
Okay. And two more.
Prologue. Author's purpose.
An author's purpose, that goes right to the message or theme. Wow. Excellent job. See, that's what I knew, that you'd have significant knowledge on this. Okay, well, and that happens to be important because in narrative, it shows up in asking students questions. It shows up in having them generate questions. It shows up in having strategies that they use and the structure of the text. So much more complex when we get to informative. We also know that if we look at the research on getting students to hone in on the critical content, we could ask them questions, we could teach them strategies, we could teach them about the structure of the text. But we also know that discussions increase their comprehension if they're done well, and having them write in response to the passage. So again, thinking about your own school's attention to comprehension and these research validated practices, are they doing an excellent job, a good job, or emerging as you get a new curriculum and a new focus, and add that to your follow-up assessment. I'm still amazed I forgot point of view. Oh, okay, so, well, so this is the way to look at your whole school in terms of what is the probability that students are going to be empowered for comprehension. Can they read the words? Do they have vocabulary? Do they have background knowledge? And do they have ways to hone in on critical content? But what we're going to focus on is taking the same research and looking at it in regards to reading and preparing kids for reading or listening to a passage. When we break down the actual research in terms of its application, it's usually done by what we might do before they read a passage that would improve their comprehension, what we might do during passage reading that would increase their comprehension, what we could do after reading that would improve their comprehension. So this is a very applicable model because you can take what we did in those checklists and say, beforehand, you better be certain they can read the words. Better be certain they have vocabulary, better be certain that they have background knowledge. So if they flow right together. So let's look first at before. Not surprising, you might want to pre-teach the pronunciation of unfamiliar words. You might want to definitely teach critical vocabulary terms that might not be in their oral language. You might want to directly teach background knowledge. Well, isn't that exactly what we'd expect, given that you have to be able to read the words, understand the meanings, and have background knowledge. During, you would want to have the students read the material, and in most cases, reading it more than once, particularly with informative text, improves comprehension. We're going to get them to hone in on critical information by using read, stop, respond. And not surprising, we could ask questions. We could teach them strategies, or we could focus on text structures. Now, those are the three big ones that again and again, and all at the end, you'll see my favorite books on comprehension that you could follow up on, asking questions, using research validated strategies, and working on text structure makes a big difference. And afterwards, you already know the two: discussions and writing in response to what you've read. Discussions and writing in response to what you've read are the two at the passage level that makes a difference. So we are going to follow this through a narrative, what we might do before, during, and after. Now, my hope is that this would match what your core programs are doing, but oftentimes they might have not thought about the background knowledge that your kids need. Or they're assuming that the students can read the words, but you know them well enough to know, I'd better work on the pronunciation before we read the passage. So you can utilize this to strengthen even the programs that you're already utilizing. So let's start with the before: pronunciation, vocabulary, and background knowledge. And I thought probably 20, 25 examples that I've used in the past for narrative, but I needed a short one today because of our time. So I picked the day that I taught to a 3rd grade class, Little Bear Lost. The first thing that I did in reading the passage, because this was not broken down into segments, I went through and read it, and I asked myself, where is there a change in the narrative? Maybe a change in terms of the setting, or a change in terms of the character, or a change in terms of the plot. So I broke it down into shorter segments, because we're going to use read, stop, respond, read, stop, respond, read, stop, respond, just as I would if we were reading a narrative to students. And so this was continued. Now, we're going to see a difference when we get to the research on informative comprehension, because usually there we would have them read 1 paragraph or 2 or 3 very related paragraphs, stop and have them respond. And that's easier to figure out the segments. More difficult in a narrative, change in action, change in setting, change in character. That's what you did. So that's the first thing I did. And then I said to myself, for 3rd graders, what words might I want to preview the pronunciation? Now, this is seldom done with any of your core programs. They really assume that if the kids have mastered the decoding skills they're teaching, they'd be able to read it with ease. We just have found that it would be a good plan for us to look at the difficult to pronounce words that they may be unfamiliar with. So be my students, and it'd be helpful if you could see this though, and follow my cursor, and let's read the title and everyone. Little Bear Lost. Little Bear is the name of one of the characters in a story, and we already have an idea of some of the challenge in the plot, because Little Bear is lost. So here are some of the words that we need for our passage, and we're going to read the multisyllabic words by parts. And everybody, and be sure you're saying it out loud. What part? X. What part? Plain. What word? Explain. Now, this story is in past tense, so it used the word explained. What word? Explained. Now, why would I had the decode this word to reinforce the decoding skills you've had, but why would I tell you the pronunciation of this word? And that's because ED is actually one of the most common errors of students, because it could be ed, it could be d, or it could be t. So I'm going to model the pronunciation. So the day I taught this, we went through part by part, what word of these words. And would that make a difference? Yes, when they came to it, they would have to spend less time figuring out the pronunciation of that word, and allow them to keep their attention on the actual meaning of what they're reading. See, the problem is, if I have to stop and put so much attention on the decoding of words, it draws my cognitive energy away from comprehension. So we want decoding to be automatic, so that I can think about what the author is sharing with me. And vocabulary. Oops, don't go. So we learned a routine for teaching vocabulary. Put up your 4 fingers. And I'm going to tell you the first one, first step, and see if you can come up with the other ones from our work on vocabulary. That if we have chosen a critical vocabulary term necessary for the comprehension of the passage, useful in the future, maybe a little bit more difficult, we would first introduce the pronunciation of the word. Because if the students can't pronounce it, they cannot attach meaning to it, store it, and retrieve it. Okay, to yourself, say the other steps. See if you had introduced pronunciation, introduce the meaning, illustrate it with some examples, and maybe just oppose that to non-examples in some cases, and then ask questions to check their understanding. So each of your core programs has a very similar series of steps, a routine for teaching vocabulary. And they all would include the meaning, the examples, and checking understanding. But many of them need to add more attention to the pronunciation. So when I read through this story, there is one word that's pretty easy to teach, but the students might not be familiar with it, and it was key to the plot. So I taught it, but with the pronunciation, then the meaning, then the examples, and checking their understanding. So you are going to teach this with me so we can have a review. Go down here, talking out loud. The word was pester, which was pinnacle to this story. All right, teaching it with me and go. This word is pester. What word? Pester. Tap and say the parts of the word. Pester. Again, pester. And everybody, pester is a verb and action word. So we introduce the pronunciation, and then we introduce the meaning, and we might use a student-friendly explanation. Teach it with me and go. When you ask for something again and again and again, you pester the other person. Some synonyms are annoy, nag, or bother. When you ask for something again and again and again, you pester the other person. So that word is critical in our story we're going to read. And then we illustrate it with examples and read the example with me and go. Jay wants a piece of candy. He will pester his sister until he gets what he wants. And we might have more than one example. Here's Felicia at the store, reading it with me. Felicia wants a new game. She begs, she nags, she pesters her mom in hope of getting the game. Think she's done this before? She's pretty good at pestering. And then we might ask questions to check their understanding. So the day I taught this, I had the question, why might a child pester a parent? But again, using those sentence stems, which you've gotten very good at, a number of you said is making a difference in the quality of students' answers, because you've taken the wording from the question and turned it into part of the answer. A child might pester a parent because, and then they have to complete it, but they use the word pester. And we could check between pester examples and non-examples. So be my students. At the grocery store, Matt begs and begs and begs for a donut. Is that pester or not pester? Definitely pester. And at the grocery store, Matt asks once for a donut. Pester or not pester? Matt only asked once, not pester. Another way to check understanding, and one of my favorites that I've mentioned to you many times, is to do compare and contrast. And so that day I taught it, because the kids had learned request, I asked them to think about how request and pester were similar, and how request and pester are different. Of course, they're similar in that you're asking for something, you want something, you pester, you ask for something, you want something, and the big difference is pester, you do it again and again and again and again. So we look at the pronunciation, and I ask you to think about doing that even if your core program doesn't. Teaching directly using our 4 steps or a different version of the same strategy in your core program to teach critical vocabulary. Will you improve in comprehension? Yes, research would say pre-teaching of vocabulary will increase passage vocabulary. And introducing other variations, the word family is also recommended. So, background knowledge. Now, this is what I think is not addressed enough in core programs. And because you are in Ohio, and so that doesn't mean that your kids have knowledge. If you read a story that occurred in South Africa, you live in rural areas, that doesn't mean that they would know anything about living in the middle of New York City. And so we need to address this with, I think, much more attention than is often done in our core programs. So I'm going to teach you, because this was a story about a Native American tribe in North Dakota. And in the 1800s, there's a lot there that even children in Ohio might not know, like where's North Dakota? And what might their life be different for a Native American group in the 1800s. And so I directly taught some background knowledge, so they would have something as we read this story to connect it to. So you're going to be my students, and I am going to teach you a little background knowledge. And afterwards, I am going to actually do what I asked the students to do, and that was to do a brain drain verbally about what they learned about the Lakota tribe. All right, so be my students. So we are reading once again about Little Bear Lost. And let's get a little idea of some background knowledge necessary for this story before we start reading it. Now, it is fiction, and so it is not a true story, but it is based on knowledge of a Native American tribe and what they did. And there are, like in all of our stories, there are what? Characters. And let's just get a little introduction to the characters. First of all, it is about the Lakota tribe. So say the parts in the word. Lakota. Say the whole word, Lakota. They're a Native American tribe. And here are our main characters. And read the words. Blue Cloud. So Blue Cloud is a young girl who is in the Lakota tribe. And her little brother is Little Bear. So these are the main characters in this story. And the setting, that is where it took place and when. And it was in the 1800s. Wow, 100, 200 years ago. And now the author doesn't tell us if it took place in the state of North Dakota or the state of South Dakota, but we know that that is where the Lakota tribe lived in the 1800s. So we can assume that in one of these states is where this fictional story took place. Teacher talk. one of the things that is actually research validated here is introducing the characters beforehand, particularly as you get more complex narratives with many characters. It appears that introducing the main characters, even having a pictorial arrangement of them and their relationships, significantly improved comprehension. So if any of you ever end up teaching 5th grade, but then even more so in middle school, high school, or college, having a map of the characters beforehand that is gone over significantly improves comprehension. Don't you wish some of your novels would come with that? Some of them do, all of them should if they're complex. Okay, be my students. So here we have the state of North Dakota and South Dakota. And what was the name of the tribe that we know lived there in the 1800s? The Lakotas, the Lakota tribe. So let's see where that is. Now, here we are in Ohio, or here we are in Oregon, and ND is North Dakota. So what state is this? Yes, North Dakota. And SD is South Dakota. You got it. And in North Dakota is right on the Canadian border, right in the middle of our country. So this is where the setting of our story took place. North Dakota, South Dakota, there's Ohio. And it took place in a prairie. Say the word prairie. So a prairie is, and read these words, land form. Remember, when we have a compound word, the second word tells us about the first. Land form, it forms the land. It was a what? Prairie. It is a large, open, flat area. Read it. Large, open, flat area. And another compound word. Read the words. Grassland. It's a land covered in grass. It has very few trees. So we know exactly what a prairie is. It's a large, open, flat area covered in grass. I can't even see a tree there, with very few trees. That is the landform that we'd find today if we went to North Dakota or, yes, South Dakota. And then I checked their understanding. Is this a prairie? And I had them tell their partner if it was a prairie, yes or no, and why. And is this possibly a prairie? Yes, no, or why. And read this with me and go. The Lakota moved from place to place on the prairie. They were nomads. What word? Nomads. The Lakota tribe was nomadic. So when we talk about a people who move from place to place, they're called nomads. And we could describe them by saying they are nomadic. So we then learned that they moved from place to place to be able to be near buffalo. And they hunted the buffalo, and they used the meat for food and the skins for clothing, shoes, and teepees. And then we learned about their horses, which allowed them to be nomadic, move from place to place. And we learned about their teepees, which provided their shelter, but could easily be taken down and moved to a new location. And because the babies had to be taken from place to place also, they put them in cradle boards, which allowed them to attach the cradle board to the horse so that they would be safe. All right, so what did I do after we did that? We did it slower than we just did, but I asked this question. What are some things that you have learned about the Lakota tribe in the 1800s? The kids stood up, faced their partner, and I said, one's your first, and you're going to start by saying, here's some things I learned about the Lakota tribe in the 1800s. And twos, you're going to count the number of things that they say before I say stop. And then I repeated it, two's your turn. You're going to start by saying, here's some things I learned about the Lakota tribe in the 1800s. And your partner's going to count. All right, but you don't have a partner with you. You can have a pretend partner. I would ask you to say as many things as you could about the Lakota tribe. I want you to do this because I want you to do this. Because we often just whip through things and we don't give time to retrieve it. We don't have time to rehearse it. And the end is that the kids don't remember it. All right, start by saying to yourself, here's some things I learned about the Lakota tribe in the 1800s, and go. Here's some things. Stop there. With your hand, put up how many things you said to yourself. 6 things. Everybody's hand should go in there. Lisa and Becky, I need to see you. Lisa had 6, and Becky had 6. I had 12, but maybe that's because I know the story even better. But think about this. Background knowledge does so many things. Background knowledge improves comprehension. Excellent. Background knowledge also gives you something that as you're reading, you can connect the story to, which will improve your comprehension. But also, aren't you more interested? Aren't you more likely to want to read the story? Background knowledge also increases our interest, our curiosity. So if our program doesn't do it, we might want to add to it. Doesn't have to be long. It can be 4 or 5 minutes of background knowledge. It just needs to be there if the students aren't familiar. And I would bet children in Ohio would not be familiar with the Lakota tribe. What are we going to do during reading? Well, during reading, we're going to read it more than once. And we're going to read, stop, respond. And we could ask questions. We could use strategies to get the kids to hone in on the critical information, or utilizing the structure of the text, particularly in narrative story grammar. But the big one is read, stop, respond. So let's start with asking questions. Now, you have been around teaching a number of years, and people have talked about text-dependent questions. But I think that we have not taken time to really define what we mean here. Text-dependent questions are ones that we're going to ask because they are ones where the answers are dependent on having read the text. That's why they're called text dependent, is that the answer is dependent on looking at the text. Now, we used to stress with you, you should ask questions as you're reading that connects the text to the student's own personal experience. So we'd ask questions like, have any of you been to North or South Dakota? Have any of you visited a reservation? Have any... But the challenge with this is that it actually takes their cognition out of the text. And actually reduces their focus on what they're reading and on comprehension. So what we want to do is we want to ask text-dependent questions, questions that you had to be able to answer by what you've read. And get your hand in the air, because I want to keep the reader's cognition in the text, not out of the text. In the text, not out of the text. In the text, not out of the text. Are you gesturing with me? Okay, remember, that's something we can add in our own classes. In the text, not out of the text. Because, and I want you to read this with me, departing the text removes students' cognition from the text message, reducing concentration and comprehension. Now, is there a time and place for those personal connection questions? Yes, afterwards. After we read this story about the Lakota tribe, after we have read this story, then we might connect it to a visitation to a Native American lodge in Ohio, but not during the reading. I want all of your cognition in the text, not out of the text. There's another reason for it too. You have some students in your class that have had a wealth of experiences. They've not just been all over Ohio. They've not just been to the state fair in Ohio. They've not just been to the Capitol in Ohio. They've not just been to a Ohio State football game. No, they have been to Canada. They have been through North Dakota. They have been to Colorado for skiing. And so one of the challenges is that if we have students in the reading of it, and we depart from the text, it actually privileges those with more experience on that topic. So for equity's sake, let's keep them in the text. Later we can have discussion that brings in their background knowledge. Now, here's a question I'm always asked. Shouldn't we just be asking higher order questions? Shouldn't all of our effort be on higher order questions? Asking for their opinion, asking for inferences. The problem is that every question we might ask is based on, do you have some general understanding? Did you understand the key details and the vocabulary and maybe the text structure? And from that, you might be able to determine the author's purpose or inferences or opinions. In other words, going up this ladder, we might have to ask some general questions. Now, if we look at the research on primary students, we'll see that there is in kindergarten, first and second grade, when we are reading narrative stories to them or informational text, that they benefit very definitely from literal questions. And in the upper grades, if I want you to make a intertextual connection, I'd better first check out, did they have general understanding that was necessary or key details so they could leap up here? So that is why we have the triangle and Nancy Frey and Doug Fisher's rendition of this, because they want to show this is the foundation. This is a foundation leading up to these higher order questions. So when I taught this, I used text-dependent questions. And I want you to read this to number 1. And after you've read it, I want you to put up your finger, your thumb to show me that you've read it. So we've read this and we ask ourselves, what is the most important understanding? What is the most important understanding that I want to validate that the students got and reinforce before we read on? So our text-dependent questions always respond to what is the most important understanding that we wish. And so this was my question. Why did Blue Cloud lose interest in her doll? Because she had a baby brother. And so it was asking, what is the most critical question? Let's do another one. Would you read down to number 2 and do it, please? Put your thumb up, and this time take a moment when you get there and think about what question you might ask. So again, it is asking ourselves, what is the most important understanding? Now, there's many questions we could have asked about that question, that paragraph. However, it might not have gotten to the true understanding we wanted the students to have. So that day I asked this question, why was it so important that Lakota children learn silence? And now this is actually a foreshadowing of what happens later in this story. I had to tell the kids, don't try this with your baby brother at home, please. Do not go home and try to teach them silence by pinching their nose. No. But for the Lakota children, if they cried, they'd likely attract enemies and it could be harmful to their tribe. So now this is interesting because one of the problems that occurred in core reading programs is they forgot to ask sometimes the most important idea. In fact, if you look at some programs, they had like a list of, there's got to be 2 main idea questions, 2 visualization questions, 2 prediction questions, and they stuffed it in there somehow. But it lost the whole essence of, particularly in a narrative, of getting to what's the most important information. The most important information. So I, along with Isabel Beck and Margaret McCohen's research, would not suggest that you have a list of comprehension types and you try to ask those questions. No, make it authentic. What is the most critical content? Now I'm going to ask you to read one more little segment of number 3. Okay, so when I asked myself, what is the most important understanding here, was that Blue Cloud wanted to hold the baby, pestered her mother, but her mother did not let that happen. But here's what I had to do. I had to ask some scaffolding questions that would help support this understanding. So, was the baby easy or difficult for Blue Cloud to hold? Difficult, too heavy. Why did mother carry a little bear in a cradle board on her back? To keep the baby safe. So why did Blue Cloud have to pester her mother to let her hold the baby? Well, because the baby was pretty heavy and her mother knew that, and her mother wanted the baby to be safe. I just wish all of our programs would come with this kind of scaffolding question, literal questions that we could be certain the students had that literal knowledge that they could then put together with this inference. In fact, sitting down with your third graders, your staff at third grade or fourth grade or fifth grade, and going through passages and looking at the questions and asking yourself, what are scaffolding questions I might ask first that would increase the probability of the thinking necessary? What normally happens is, without the scaffolding questions, I don't know, I don't know. Maybe you've heard that in your class before. I don't know, I don't know. And then you have to back up and scaffold it. Well, in many cases, you can pretty predict the I don't know and have scaffolding questions ready to go. Now, we're not going to do the whole passage, though I'm sure it would be a thriller. But for each segment, I showed you the question I asked, and so you can look at that.
Dr. Archer,
Yes.
I have some questions from Jenna. She had a comment at some point where she said, really interesting, glad this was brought up. But then she asked, is this all verbal conversation or written response or both? And I didn't see exactly when that came through, but
Well, that would be an excellent question. So if we are reading a narrative story, most written responses would be done after we've read the story, because if we stop, we might put some annotations on it if we can write in the material, but it's just like a novel that you're reading. You're not going to stop and take a lot of notes. Might stop and reflect on it, but you're going to keep reading to keep the plot. So we're talking narrative here. Now, afterwards, we might respond in written writing, but probably less so during it. Very different than informative text, where we might take notes. We might fill in a graphic organizer as we are reading it, as well as responding with writing afterwards. So most of these questions would be in narrative, would be verbal answers to keep the plot moving along. Does that make sense to you, Loretta? Okay. All right. Let's see what our time is. We might even finish on time. That would be a miracle. So we can also have students generate questions, which actually has more research in informative text than it does in narrative. But children can be taught to reflect on the story that they've written, and as they go, write down questions and answers. But this is primarily supported by, have they been taught story grammar? And so we might stop and the students might write down, and they would write this down, who were main characters, and they could write the answer. What was the setting of the story, and write answers. And so, but the strongest research on this was where the students had been taught story grammar and generated questions based on those story grammar elements. Okay. Now, story grammar is the whole, almost all of the research on narrative comprehension focuses on story grammar. We had story grammar, and we could embed in the questions we asked. We could teach students how to utilize story grammar to generate their own questions. We could use it to retell a story. We could use it in writing a summary afterwards. We could use it to have them plan their stories that they wrote using story grammar. So there's lots of reasons to teach it. And so, for example, in the class that I taught this lesson in, third grade, the students then had the students retell the story utilizing story grammar. So they practiced it to themselves. This story took place either in North Dakota or South Dakota with the Lakota tribe in the 1800s. And the main character was Blue Cloud. And Blue Cloud's problem was that she got distracted from taking care of her little brother when she raced horses with her friends. And at the beginning of the story, she went out with her friends and they were just riding to a new location. And she had the baby with her on the cradle board. But then they started racing and racing and racing and racing and racing some more. But she had to put the baby in the grass. And then when they were all done, which was, like a few minutes later, they could not locate the baby. Now, the baby didn't cry because remember, the baby had learned that silence. If you start crying, you can get your nose pinched. So didn't cry. And what happened in the end was her horse went over and pound on the ground, and there was the baby. But what really happened was her mother said, "Oh, you were not responsible." And so the students did a beautiful job with a story grammar structure. Now, I went through many, many materials and sort of made this for you, the kinds of story grammar questions that you could ask. Basic questions: what is the setting? Who is the main character? What was the character's problem? How they try to resolve it? What was the outcome? What was the theme or message? So some teachers have actually copied these slides onto pages that then they used in a small group or a large group. But also, this is one on structure, what happened in the beginning, middle, and end. And then ones that are sort of expanded questions about the setting. Where did it happen? When did it happen? What details did the author give us about the setting? What was the relevance of the setting? Why was this setting selected for the story? So that you could reproduce these and utilize them in a small or large group. And even in 5th grade, we've even had the students have the cards, these on cards, and they would read, stop, respond, and then ask the questions. So main character questions, questions about the problem, conflict, or goal, and attempts to resolve it, questions, and outcome questions, and theme questions. So I hope those might be useful to you. Well, we've read a story. What do we do afterwards? Basically, the two that keep coming up in the research, whether it's informational text or narrative, is have a discussion or have them write in response to the passage. So let's start with the writing in response. If you look at the research on comprehension, one thing that emerges in terms of written responses is having them write a summary. And we're going to look at summaries also in informational text. And this is a very simple writing frame that the students could either complete or could copy and complete. Could be used in a 2nd grade, a 1st grade class. The main character in this story is Blue Cloud. The problem in this story is her baby brother is lost in the grass. This is a problem because the baby wouldn't cry, so they couldn't find the baby. The problem is solved when the horse went over and pawed at the grass, and so Blue Cloud found the baby. Or a more complex frame, you ask, let's say, a 4th grader to summarize a story, and here's what they do. This is what happened first, and this is what happened second, and this is what happened 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th. And they would basically tell the events in the story. But we really would want them to hone in on critical elements. So a story frame would allow that. So this is one that we wrote as an example. where the students copied this and then completed it. The title of the story was Little Bear Lost. The setting of the story was a Lakota village in North Dakota in the 1800s. Blue Cloud, a young Lakota girl who loved riding horses with her friends, was the main character of this story. And so the students ended up having a reinforcement of story grammar, the setting, the main character, the problem, how they try to resolve it, what do they do next to try to resolve it, what happened in the end. If you were to get my very favorite book on writing, The Writing Revolution by Judith Hochman and Natalie Wexler, then you could look particularly in their short writing activities for sentences. That would be very useful to do on a regular basis for written comprehension to what you've read. So here's my favorites. One is called Sentence Expansion, and the students have a sentence starter. Blue Cloud lost her brother. And then on the screen, it has this with the words when, where, and why. So the students on their own paper have to write down the start sentence, when and while horse racing with friends, where, on the prairie, why, she set the cradle board in the tall grass. And then they have to combine this into a sentence. And this is one that a third grader wrote. Yes, it's a very good one. One day, while horse racing with friends on the prairie, Blue Cloud lost her baby brother when she set his cradle board in the tall grass. So we get much out of this. We have gotten comprehension, and we have writing. This is another favorite. This actually is my favorite because teachers like it so much. And in schools where I work, we often do this like twice a week as follow-up for writing in terms of narrative or informative, where we give the students a sentence stem. Blue Cloud lost her baby brother because Blue Cloud lost, let's see if we can get that back. Blue Cloud lost her baby brother, but Blue Cloud lost her baby brother, so. And so these have subordinating conjunctions that differ, because, but, and so. And these were the responses of children. And again, particularly strong as a written response we would do often. Sentence expansion, because, but, so, summary, excellent. And we can have a discussion. Now, if we look back on our work on opportunities to respond, we just talked about discussions. And we're taking that right into discussions on a story. That we would have an engaging, we would have the students engage in a discussion. Let's go right here. And we'd ask an engaging question. And here are some suggestions. You know, what was your favorite part of the story? What surprised you in the story? What did the author want us to feel about? How is the story similar to? What is another way the story could have ended? And you can generate even others. And we would give students time to write down their talking points, making notes on what they were going to say. We would have them share their talking points with their partners before we had a class discussion, so that even our shyest students have already tried out their ideas and have already been a part of the discussion. And then as a whole group or small groups, then we would have a discussion on that question. All right, so I'm going to bet that many of the things that we are talking about here that are research validated have been embedded into your programs. But maybe in terms of looking at before, during, and after, there are some things that you might even take to a higher place. Maybe you say before, they don't really introduce how to read the words that are difficult. I could pre-teach those. Or they don't have enough background knowledge, and we could strengthen that. Or during it, it's really not broken down into natural segments. I could do that. And I could ask questions that would generate from story grammar. Or I could have students generate questions, or afterwards, oh, I really like because, but so. We could do that twice a week with our narrative stories. So hopefully there is a takeaway, and either related to what we do before or what we might do during. Don't forget, read, stop, respond, and text-dependent questions that keep them in the text, not out of the text. And afterwards, discussions and short writing. So as you put in your takeaway, I'm going to check back with Loretta. Were there any other questions that came in? If you have one, this is your opportunity.
I did not see any.
Well, would you do me this favor, though? We're meeting on comprehension next time, and you're going to put into the chat box what was the best takeaway or takeaways from today, but also any questions. And that one about would you have embedded writing as you are going, has more to do with informative text than narrative. But any other questions, we're going to make our last session on December 15th the very, very best. So put those questions in that you might have about comprehension, and I'll get them in advance and be all set to infuse them into our work with informative text. And don't forget to take those checklists. Remember the 4 big ones. They have to be able to read the words, know the meaning of the words, have background knowledge, and have strategies or questions that hone them in on the critical content. All right. I think we might have gone over a few minutes, but it was, we got done with it, and sit down with your colleagues in your grade level and see how this might inform some of your work. Thank you, thank you, thank you on this December 1st, and I will see you on December 15th, 10 days before Christmas. All right, but Loretta, did you have a question?
Nope, I was just waving to everybody that was going to be leaving.
You were waving. So everybody, would you do me a big favor? Would you open up your cameras? Because I want to see everybody. Okay, so one thing I do to help me learn your names, which I'm getting pretty good at. I mean, I figured out Lisa without her having to tell me today. So look this way, look your very best. Okay, 1, 2, 3, picture. Excellent. And keep hanging in there. Be certain your cameras are open. I'm looking. Derek, you're looking good. Okay, and sitting up, looking at me. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Let's see if we have any more. I think we might have gotten everybody. All right. So would the team stay on, and any administrators? Todd, you're always with me, and Susan, and we'll see rest of you on December the 15th. Bye-bye. Bye, guys. Good job.